Hey guys, welcome back to the DFS Army's NHL Breakaway. This is the fastest slate breakdown you're going to find on the web. We have 12 games to get to today. We have 15 minutes to do it, so start the clock and let's get rolling. First of all, thanks for joining me. Second of all, like I said, huge slate. On big slates like this, 12 games is a lot to process. So what I typically do is I look for smaller slates to play. You've got a 12-game slate, a 2-game turbo, a 3-game turbo, a 4-game late slate, and a 2-game later slate on Draftkings. Generally, Fanduel mirrors Draftkings, but if I'm looking at just the Draftkings slates, I'm going to focus on the Thursday late slate. That 4-gamer really allows me to cut down on a lot of the processing of the information, and it also lets me avoid a lot of the sharks and increase my edge towards winning. So on big days like this, I might throw a little bit in the 12-game slate just for fun to kind of test my skills and see how I do, but most of my play is going to be on the 4-game slate. I would rather see a 5 or 6-game slate, but 4 games is what it is. Let's dive into some of these games and let's take a little look, see at what we got. First game leading off, we have Nashville heading into Washington. We got a 5.5 over under, which isn't terrible, but Washington's favored by a minus 160, minus 163, somewhere in there. However, Washington is 5-5 in their last 10 games. They're not exactly great. Their shots on goal are down. Their fantasy points scored are down over their last 12 to 14 games. That's not a good trend. That usually when things are trending in that direction, we're not getting the prices for our players that we need to create value. In a lot of cases, that means these teams, these players are overpriced. Washington's Washington, though. They can come back in a hurry, and they can just put up 7-8 goals if they feel like it. And it's not like Nashville isn't allowing points. Nashville is allowing the 4th most points over a 4-week span. So it's not like Nashville is some lockdown defense. In terms of Nashville, though, they are your top point producer right now in the NHL in terms of fantasy points. The problem with Nashville is they're going up against Washington, who is a defensive-minded team. So that may squelch their ceiling a little bit. I'm not a real big fan of this game. It's just not the greatest thing on the slate. But I'm not going to be offended if you take players off this game. Second game, Philly and New Jersey. There's a 5 over under, which usually shies us away. But New Jersey's such a train wreck right now. They're 0-8-2 in their last 10 games. They've lost 10 in a row. That's just abysmal, to be honest with you. Philly's on a back-to-back, but Philly puts a lot of shots on goal. They're 10th in the league in that area, and they're middle of the pack. They're kind of, they're right at 15th on fantasy points produced. They've been okay lately. More recently in the last 4 weeks. The part that concerns me about this game is they don't match up very well against New Jersey. New Jersey owns the last 10 games head-to-head with Philly at a 7-2-1 record. So I will temper my expectations on Philly. I won't be touching a New Jersey Devil, to be honest with you. Game number 3 looks like Florida and the Columbus Blue Jackets. With Columbus, we got a 5.5 total. Columbus is scheduled to score over 3 goals, minus 165 favorite at home. That puts the Bob in play. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. Florida is on the opposite end of that spectrum. They're 2-7-1 in their last 10 games. When you look at the teams that are scoring, Florida's putting a lot of shots on goal, but Florida's giving up a lot of shots on the other end too. So they're a team that you can attack. They may respond with some goals, but they're generally going to be giving up shots and points. They're kind of like the old-fashioned Toronto because Toronto's fallen out of those ranks. Columbus they're a top 10 shooting team. They're 9th right now in shots on goal. So the activity should be there for this game. When you look at the points produced, though, Columbus is a top 10 team, and Florida it ranks 11th in allowed points. So Columbus is in a pretty good spot here. If you had to pick one guy out of this team, I would say go for the defenseman Savard. He's a cheap punt play to get you some exposure to this game. In Game 4, Minnesota and Carolina, this is a game that's kind of interesting because Minnesota, you'll see they're ranked 4th in terms of fantasy points scored over the past 4 weeks, but they've lost back-to-back games and they're not exactly hot. They do shoot a lot. They give up a lot of shots. They do score points, but they also give up points over the past month, that little snapshot there. So this game could go both ways. I don't anticipate it doing so, to be quite honest with you, but I'm waiting for Minnesota to bounce back. Carolina's been reeling a little bit. Yeah, they had an 8-goal game a couple of games ago, but they're 3-3-4 over their last 10. They do shoot the puck, though, so you should get some activity there. If you're looking for some cheaper punts, you might look for that winger, that DiGiuseppe, that has been playing for. Well, he was listed, I thought, for Carolina. Maybe he's a Calgary guy. That's my bad. You'll have to double check it. I don't know why I wrote that down. But look for cheap guys. Look for cheap defensemen. Falk's not exactly cheap. Hannafin, if he pumps shots on goal, look at his game logs. Look at Ryan. Look at some of these other guys that are a little bit cheaper. Teravainen is another one. If these guys are pumping shots on goal, they should give you a little bit of a floor for that cheap price. So that hopefully makes up for the boof on DiGiuseppe. Game number 5 is Winnipeg and the New York Islanders. This is a game that we might focus on a little bit in terms of, it's probably the game I'll be looking at. Why is it a 6 in the over-under? Well, you've got a low Vegas total. You got a couple of teams that score points. In terms of fantasy points scored, Winnipeg is 3rd in the league and New York is 14th. New York was a lot higher than that. They're on a little bit of a skid. But in terms of points allowed, Winnipeg is ranked 2nd and New York is ranked 8th. So you got two basically top 10 teams or above average teams in terms of scoring points going against two teams that are not very good defensively. When you get that matchup of a strong offense going against a weak defense, it usually leads to a lot of fantasy points. That's why you get the 6. If you had to pick a couple of guys to focus on here, I know Winnipeg's lost its last 4 games in a row, but if you had to pick a couple of guys to focus on, dude, that whatever his name is, that Sang, Yunho Sang, it shows he's not available on Draftkings, which I don't know that he is or isn't. If you can get him into your roster, dude's been pretty electric lately. And Andrew Ladd's another one that's been pretty electric. The past couple of games, they're producing. They're cheap. They're getting you some points. They're putting some shots on goal. They're getting an assist here or there, enough to bring value and allow you to spend up in other areas. Toronto and Tampa Bay, to be honest with you, Toronto's really on the skids. I don't know why. They were a team that scored points but also allowed points, and lately both those categories are down. They're allowing shots and they're allowing points, so they're a little weaker defensively, but they're not scoring like they were. They're very middle of the pack all of a sudden, and that opens the door for a Tampa Bay who's not been great but has been pretty good. And Tampa Bay tends to really concentrate their top line of production with a little bit of Druin mixed in there. But you go down here into the defensive pairs, and Hedman's a great way to spend some money. You got a floor of about 4 points a game, it seems like, and a ceiling of about 9. So I wouldn't be opposed to running some of these guys against Toronto tonight. When it comes right down to it, what we're looking to do is just create some of that. If you're looking for a little bit of numbers, Tampa Bay's won 4 in a row. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. And in terms of head-to-head between these two teams, Tampa owns that matchup 7-2-1 in their last 10 meetings. So there's pretty good signs there for Tampa Bay. Going up into Chicago, into Ottawa. Chicago's 8-2-0. They've won their last 2 in a row. Ottawa's 7-2-1. So you got a couple of teams facing off against each other that can do a little bit of damage. Chicago is both scoring, shooting the puck and allowing shots. They're both scoring, and they're not necessarily allowing a ton of fantasy points against, but it's not exactly like they're just defensively locked down at the moment. They've had a couple of bad games in their last 10, which is why you get the 2 losses. If I had to look for a guy, I would run over into Ottawa, and I'd pick up the cheap defenseman Clayson. At 2.9K, dude's putting on about 1.5, 2 points a game, maybe a little bit more than that. So there's your floor again, allowing you to spend up in other spots. This is a game not exactly to stack up, but it is a game you can target a little bit. Boston. Going into Edmonton, Boston's on a back-to-back. Boston's also won 4 in a row. They're 8-2-0 in their last 10. And Edmonton's not exactly the greatest thing in the world going right now, but they are at home. If you look at the head-to-head matchup, you've got a 6-1-3 advantage to Boston in this one. Boston is a very, very consistent source of points. Pasternak, Marchand, Bergeron. Some of these third-liners can get up in there a little bit. Chara, Krug. These are guys that you can throw in to your lineups. I don't know that I'm on a lot of the Oilers today. I just haven't seen much out of these guys lately to really excite me. So Detroit into Arizona Coyotes. This is another kind of interesting game when you really kind of dig into the numbers. Detroit being on a back-to-back, the Vegas lines were very telling on Detroit yesterday. The lines slipped from a minus 200 all the way down to a minus 120, and as a result, Colorado beat them. My buddy Zetterberg, I'm not rostering him for a while. He's hit a 3 or 4 game skid where he's not cash safe for me anymore. I'm largely off this game, but if you really wanted to in a tournament, you wanted to target the Coyotes with some Red Wings skaters, it's not a bad way to go. It's just know that it's a relatively risky way to go. Dallas into Vancouver. You got a minus 115 favorite in Dallas, which isn't telling you much. You've got Dallas has lost their last 3 in a row. Vancouver's lost their last 4 in a row. I mean, who the hell wants to win a game around here? Somebody's got to step up and take this one. They're not going to end in a tie. So if I had to look at the numbers, I'm digging in. I'm seeing that Dallas likes to shoot the puck, and Vancouver's given up the most shots on goal in the last 4 weeks. And I'm also noticing that both these teams give up fantasy points. Dallas gives up the most points in the league. They've overtaken Arizona for that honor or that toilet bowl trophy, whatever you want to call it. And Vancouver gives up the 3rd most points. So there should be some points scored in this game. If you want a cheap, or not necessarily cheap, but you want a sneaky GPP game to stack, this might be it. I think a lot of people are going to see 2 crap teams, and they're not going to realize that 2 crap teams sometimes lead to a lot of fantasy production. We saw it just a week or so ago with a couple of games that were kind of mediocre that we called off as a GPP stack. It exploded for like 7 goals between the 2 teams. If you're loaded up on both sides here, you might find yourself an easy road to the top of some GPPs if this game hits like it looks like it might. Steven Johns is a great cheap exposure to the Dallas offense, typically always. And over on the Vancouver side, you need a cheap winger. Mark Scranlon's on the top line with the Sedin brothers, and he's been producing lately. In fact, he's the one guy out of the Vancouver Canucks that has been producing. Jump down Buffalo into the LA Kings. This game's a little better for the Kings side of things since Buffalo's been reeling a little bit. Buffalo's 2-6-2 in their last 10 games. You got the minus 213 favorite on this, which slaps us right onto Jonathan Quick as our chalk goalie of the night, being the largest favorite on the night. LA shoots 6th most often. Buffalo gives up the 4th most shots. Buffalo must have tightened up a little bit because they've been the first, the team that allows the most shots of anyone over the entire course of the season. So, and Buffalo is scoring points, but they're also allowing points. I don't know if this game slants LA as favorably, but it certainly does give them an advantage. I just don't like targeting 5 over-under games. McCabe on defense for Buffalo is another cheap exposure, a little bit of power play exposure for you if you want to load up on some punts and end up getting into some studs. I wouldn't recommend putting 2 or 3 punts in your lineup, but 1 or 2. Well, not 3, but 1 or 2 is not a bad thing, not the worst thing that you could do to spend up in other areas. What games are you going to target? We'll recap those in a minute. St. Louis and Chicago. St. Louis on the back end of a back-to-back. San Jose. San Jose carrying their minus 165 is not a. I can't get on Carter Hutton necessarily just because they're on the road. Martin Jones, I can't necessarily get on either because St. Louis has been playing pretty well lately. And neither of these teams are set to score against each other because they both suppress points. When you look at point suppression, you've got St. Louis ranked 25th in the league, and you got San Jose ranked dead last in the league, which means they give up the fewest amount of points. So you got 2 defensive teams going against each other. If I had to pick a cheap defenseman out of this game, I guess it's not there anymore. Schlemko's hurt, I suppose. But there are some guys up and down the slate a little bit that you can target. This game I'll largely be off of. I know it's a hammer play, but I just don't. I would, if these 2 games, I'd focus more on LA. So to recap, we're going to focus on Winnipeg and the New York Islanders first. We're going to focus on Columbus, probably second, Tampa Bay, maybe third. And then secondary offenses would be like Philadelphia, Nashville, Washington, Chicago, Ottawa, Boston, and the LA Kings. And then that cheap, or that I keep wanting to call it cheap, I want to say sneaky. The sneaky GPP play is your Dallas and Vancouver game. So if you really wanted to, you could load up some of these chalkier plays like Winnipeg, New York Islanders, Columbus, Tampa Bay, whatever. Maybe some Chicago guys, Boston guys will be probably pretty chalky, even though they're not in just stellar matchups. And then you throw in a little mini stack or so of that Vancouver and Dallas game. And if that hits, that's enough differentiation to send you to the top of the leaderboard. So there's your little tip, your construction tip for the day. I'm Choppadong. Follow me on Twitter at Choppadong. Follow me at the DFSArmy.com. There's a link in the description. And that is your 12-game slate breakdown done in 15 minutes or less. Peace out, guys.